My name is Samantha, and I've worked as a night shift nurse for years. I've seen some unsettling things in my line of work, but nothing prepared me for what happened one night. It had been an exhausting shift, the kind where everything that could go wrong did. When I finally got home, I was so tired I barely made it to my bed. I didn't even bother changing out of my scrubs or pulling up the blanket. I just collapsed face first onto the mattress and passed out. Sleep came fast, but waking up was a nightmare. I opened my eyes, but something felt wrong. My body was so heavy it was like I was glued to the bed. I tried to move my arms, my legs, even just a finger, but I couldn't. I was completely paralyzed. That's when I heard it, soft crying. At first, I thought it was my imagination. The sound was faint, blending with the pounding of my heart. But as I lay there, it became clear. Someone was crying, and it was coming from inside my room. Panic gripped me, but I couldn't do anything. My body wouldn't respond. I managed to move my eyes, straining to look toward the sound. That's when I saw her. In the corner of my room, near the wall, a small figure was crouched on the floor. She had her knees pulled up to her chest, and her head was buried in her arms. Long, messy hair hung down, hiding her face. She was crying softly, almost like she didn't want anyone to hear. But as I watched, her sobs grew louder and more desperate, like she was breaking apart. Then she said my name. Samantha. Her voice was soft and childlike, but it sent a chill straight through me. She didn't lift her head. She just stayed there, rocking slightly, whispering my name over and over. Samantha. Samantha. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. All I could do was lie there, frozen, as her crying grew louder and her voice sharper. Samantha. Her head snapped up. I couldn't see her face clearly, shadows covered most of it. But what I could see was enough to terrify me. Her eyes were too big and too dark, like black pools. They glistened with tears. Her mouth was twisted into a horrible grimace, her teeth sharp and unnaturally white. She screamed my name again. Samantha. Her voice echoed around the room, piercing and full of pain. Her cries turned into horrible wails, raw and gut-wrenching. It felt like the air in the room was being sucked out, leaving me suffocated by her grief. But she didn't move. She just sat there, her presence pressing down on me like a crushing weight. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The crying, the pressure, it all vanished. My body was free again. I shot up in bed, gasping for air. My heart was racing and sweat drenched my skin. The room was silent now, empty. No girl. No crying. Just the faint hum of the streetlight outside. I wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, a cruel trick of exhaustion. But when I turned on the light, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The carpet in the corner where the girl had been was damp. To this day, I still hear her sometimes, soft and faint like a whisper in the back of my mind. And every time I step into my bedroom, I can't help but glance at that corner, half expecting to see her there, crouched and crying. It was just another night for Andrew, a 25-year-old college student who had been pulling all-nighters to prepare for exams. His roommates were out of the hostel, spending their last days before finals with their families, so he was alone in his room that night. After hours of staring at his laptop, he finally gave in to exhaustion and tossed himself onto his bed without changing out of his clothes. Sleep came quickly, but it didn't last long. Andrew woke up abruptly, but something was wrong. His limbs felt heavy, his chest was tight, and he couldn't move. At first, he thought it was just the weight of exhaustion, but as he tried to move even a finger or lift a hand, he realized he was completely paralyzed. The room felt unnaturally cold, colder than it had ever been. It wasn't just the temperature, it was as if the air itself had turned against him. The comfort of his room was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Silence filled the space so completely that even his breathing seemed deafening. Then he saw them. 4 figures stood around his bed, one at each corner. They were not human, at least not entirely. Their bodies were shrouded in darkness, flickering like shadows that didn't belong. But their faces were unmistakable. Each had an unnaturally wide grin stretching from ear to ear, far too large for their heads. And their eyes were the only thing he could truly see, bright, glowing, and unblinking, fixed on him. His heart pounded as he tried to scream or move, but his body wouldn't respond. The figures stood still, grinning, staring. Their gaze made him feel like dissecting his body. Then he felt it. Something cold and slick brushed against his foot. At first he thought it was just a cramp, but then it moved, slow and deliberate, coiling around his ankle. It was unmistakable, scales. Andrew's eyes darted downward, desperate to see what it was, but his body still wouldn't obey. The figures didn't move. Their grotesque smiles and glowing eyes were all he could focus on. The pressure around his ankle grew stronger, heavier. It felt alive, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. A low, menacing hiss filled the room. Suddenly the grip tightened. The snake wrapped around his leg. A searing pain shot through his leg like fangs piercing his skin. Andrew's vision blurred from the pain, and his eyes welled up with tears. The pain in his leg was agonizing. He didn't know if he was going to suffocate or pass out from the pain. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The pressure disappeared. The snake was gone. The figures vanished into the darkness. His body finally unlocked. He gasped for air, his chest heaving, his body shaking. Tears kept rolling down his face uncontrollably. Andrew didn't sleep that night or the next, or the night after that. When his roommates returned, he told them what happened. He described how real the experience felt. But they laughed it off, saying he must have been hallucinating from exhaustion. But Andrew knew what he had seen was more than a hallucination. It started 2 months ago, but I'll never forget the first night it happened. I went to bed around midnight after scrolling through my phone for a while. Nothing unusual about the day, work, dinner, a few messages to friends. But when I woke up in the early hours, everything felt wrong. I opened my eyes and immediately noticed how quiet it was. No hum of the refrigerator, no distant sound of cars, just this strange, oppressive silence. I tried to roll over, but I couldn't move. My arms, my legs, even my fingers, they were frozen in place. Then I saw her. There's a tall mirror directly across from my bed, the kind with an old wooden frame that I inherited from my grandmother. In the mirror, I could see myself lying in bed. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, partially obscured in the shadows, stood a woman. Her figure was pale and distorted, like the mirror was warping her image. She wore a long, tattered dress, and her head was tilted unnaturally, like her neck had been snapped. Her hair hung in clumps, and her eyes were wide, unblinking, and pitch black. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't even close my eyes. All I could do was watch as she moved. She didn't walk. She jerked forward in strange, stuttering motions like a glitch in a video. She moved closer to the bed, closer to me. And the worst part? Her reflection wasn't in the mirror anymore. She was in my room, right beside me. When she reached the side of my bed, she leaned down until her face was inches from mine. I could see her skin close up, gray and cracked like dry earth. Her breath smelled like decay, and I could feel it on my cheek. Then she smiled, a slow, stretching smile that shouldn't have been possible. She whispered something, but I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like a mix of laughter and sobbing, layered over a voice that didn't belong to a human. And then she climbed onto the bed. I felt the mattress sink under her weight as she straddled my chest. Her cold, claw-like hands pressed down on my shoulders. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. She leaned in closer, her black eyes staring into mine, and whispered again. This time I understood. "You can't leave me," she said, her voice hollow and echoing. I thought I was going to die. Just as her hands wrapped around my throat, I woke up. It was morning. The room was bright, everything seemed normal, but the mirror had a crack in it. one that wasn't there before. I don't know how it happened, I never heard anything break. But the cracks formed a perfect web, with the largest fracture running right through where her face had been. I got rid of the mirror that same day. And after that, I never saw her again. I'm still afraid to sleep, but I'm even more afraid of what might happen if I don't.